In this video, we're going to take a look at Go functions and the fact that they are what's known as first-class objects in Go. We'll take a look at a few examples of what this actually means in practice. Let's start off then by clarifying what we mean that functions are first class in Go. This means a few things. It means that you can define functions inside other functions. It means you can create anonymous functions. You can pass functions as function parameters or even as return values. You can store functions in variables, and you can use them in channels, which we've not seen yet, but we'll see in the future. So there's lots of things you can do with functions as they are first class in Go. Let's take a look at some examples of this then. So firstly, we can create an anonymous function and assign it to a variable name. Let's just create a variable called var, and then we'll create what's known as an anonymous function in Go. And in this one, we'll just return a string, won't take any arguments, and let's just return the string blah. So this here is what's known as an anonymous function. It has no name, basically. It's anonymous. We can also assign it to a variable name, as we've seen here. We've assigned it to blah, and this is basically one of the results of functions being first class in Go. You can assign it to a variable name if you so wish. We could then, of course, call this if we wanted to, so we can go ahead and call blah, and this should run absolutely fine. So if we go ahead and run this particular file, we'll see we get the output of blah. So you can define functions in other functions. We've got our main function here. We've defined another function, and that's known as an anonymous function. And you can also store it as a variable. With anonymous functions, so let's create a new variable. We'll just call this one A. We'll create a new anonymous function. We'll just return, let's go for an integer this time. And we'll just return 1, for example. We can also directly call this anonymous function. So this function here is anonymous. Again, we've got no name of the function. So we go ahead and pass parentheses at the end of that function, and this is going to be called directly. So if we go ahead and print out the result of this, so print out the A variable, we'll see that we get 1 as the output here. Okay, so A is 1, and that is just calling an anonymous function. And you'll see this quite a lot in a reasonable amount of code. So it's good to know that you can do that with anonymous functions. One thing we also said is that you can pass functions as parameters to other functions. So let's take a look at that now. What I'm going to do is down here, I'm just going to declare a type. Again, we've not gone into this too much yet, but it should be fairly self-explanatory. So we're going to declare a type of an example function, and that's just going to be a function, takes an integer, and then we'll just return a Boolean from that function. And so this is just what's known as a type signature, and we'll see how that's used now. So we're going to head and create a new variable. We'll call this one C. It is going to be a function, and it will take a variable. We'll just call this D, and it's going to be a type of example function, and it's going to return a Boolean, this function here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to return D, and then we'll pass in a 1. So as we said here, you can pass functions themselves as parameters to other functions. So this D variable here is actually going to be a function type. And you can see here that we're then going to call that particular parameter, which is a type of example function, and pass in the required arguments, in this case, just an integer here. Let's go ahead and actually run this, and then we can see what this looks like. So we're going to print out the result of this particular function. So we're going to print out the result of C. Going to then open up our parentheses. So we're going to be calling the C function here, the anonymous function here. And you can see here, the first argument it takes, D, is an example function type. So we can pass in an anonymous function here, and it's going to simply take, let's say, A as an integer, and it's going to return a Boolean. So that matches the type signature of our example function below. And then just for simplicity's sake, we'll just return true here. So let's just run this, and then we can run through the example again. So you see we get the output of true there from that particular function. So we'll just clarify that. So C is true. Let me run that again. And you'll see C is true. So just run through that again. So we've created a type signature here called example function, which is basically a function that takes an integer and returns a Boolean. We then created an anonymous function here, which takes the example function as an argument and it returns a Boolean. We then return the result of calling that D function or that example function. And then we go ahead and just print out the result of calling C and then passing in our anonymous function. So a little bit convoluted there, but it does mean that you can pass functions as parameters to other functions in Go, which can be super, super useful. And you'll probably see that again in quite a lot of code. So you can store functions in slices, you can store them in maps, not as the key, but as the value. And we'll just take a look at a quick example with a slice, and it's basically the same in a map. You just store it as the value. Let's go ahead and create a new anonymous function here. We'll go ahead and call it add. This will be a simple function that takes a and b, which are both integers, and we'll return an integer here. And again, we'll just return a plus b. Let's do the same for the subtract function. So subtract, again, it takes a and b. This time we're just going to minus those. And then we'll do the same for multiply as well. And then again, we'll just multiply those values. So we can then pass those in a slice. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. So we'll just call this slice here ops for operations, for example. It's then going to be a slice, and the type of that slice is going to be a function that takes an integer as an argument and then another integer as an argument, and it returns an integer itself. We can then open up the slice and pass in those functions as values. So subtract, and then multiply. And you'll see that that actually works as you would expect in Go. Doesn't complain, the types are correct. So we can go ahead and actually just run this code. If we go ahead and create a for loop, for example, we can just run this and see what it looks like. So let's just do for I in ops, so the range of our operations. Let's go ahead and get the result of our operation. So op, and we're going to pass in x and y, for example. Actually, let's just pass in we'll stick with x and y, and we'll just declare those above. So we're going to head and print out the result of these. So let's print out the result. So we'll just print out res, and then res itself, and we'll just declare x and y above here. So we'll make it equal 10 and 5. Let's actually just get rid of the I for now because we're not going to be using that. Okay, so before we run this, let's just run through what we've done here in this code. So we've created 3 anonymous functions, as we saw before. We've done it with the shorts declaration rather than the var keyword, but it's the same. These functions all have the same signature. So take a and b, which are integers, and it returns an integer. We just then do some mathematical operation on those functions. We then create a new slice called ops, which takes a function of taking 2 integers and returning an integer. We then pass in those 3 functions. We then declare x and y. We then loop through those functions and we just call the function and print out the result. Let's run this and just see what this actually looks like. So we can see here, we get the result, we get 15, we get 5, and we get 50. And that makes sense, right? So 10 plus 5 is 15, 10 minus 5 is 5, and 10 times 5 is 50. And if we want to print that, make it look a bit nicer, we can just print out the result. So the number, as we saw in the earlier video. And you'll see you just get res 15, res 5, and res. So that's all I want to cover with functions themselves. And before we wrap up the video then, let's just do one little change to this bit of code here because it looks a little bit scruffy. Let's go ahead and create a new type declaration and we'll call this type an operation. It's going to be a function that takes an integer and another integer, and then it returns an integer. So this function signature here matches the function signature on our add, subtract, and multiply. So there's operations. We can then go ahead and replace the hard-coded function signature there with our operation type. And that makes it just look a little bit nicer and a little bit cleaner to read. So they are first-class citizens in Go. You can create anonymous functions. You can assign them to variables. You can create types. You can pass them to functions as parameters. Lots of stuff that you can do with them.